large to the foundation of college athletics is efforts by activists and the National Labor Relations Board appointees under the Biden-Harris administration to deem student athletes as employees. Because of this, there are many unresolved questions regarding how college sports will look in the future. Despite more money than ever flowing into college athletics, universities are supporting fewer sports teams due to a range of challenges. This reality results in fewer scholarship opportunities for young American athletes, many of whom will not become professional athletes, but rather play sports as part of their educational pursuits. At its core, college sports are about enhancing student athletes and their academic experience, as well as enhancing their careers after graduation. Unfortunately, that mission was threatened by President Biden's radical NLRB stemming from former General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo's memo providing guidance to all NLRB field offices that certain student athletes are employees under the National Labor Relations Act. The mandate to reclassify student athletes as employees would have devastating consequences. The increased cost of unionization and administrative headaches would have threatened the viability of many college athletic programs, including many women's sports and small school athletic programs, resulting in fewer teams, fewer scholarships, and fewer opportunities for our young people. Additionally, employee status would have triggered unintended consequences for student athletes and could have led them to receiving fewer benefits, having scholarships revoked for poor performance, and having scholarships taxed by the IRS. While the Trump NLRB acting general counsel rightfully withdrew the Abruzzo memo and the relevant cases before the NLRB have been withdrawn, it is still incumbent on the committee to consider whether federal legislation is needed to ensure a future board does not attempt to impose the same wrong-headed policy. I now yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today. As I mentioned during the hearing we convened on this subject last March, college athletes should be treated like people first and foremost, and students, not just sources of revenue for their college and universities. We should stand with them, ensure their well-being, and reject any effort to strip away their right to organize and collectively bargain if necessary. Organizations like the NCAA boast massive revenues from the hard work of college athletes. While these college athletes are often taken advantage of and mistreated, college athletes put in long hours on top of their classes, homework, extracurriculars, and even a job, if they are permitted to have one. In the 2023 to 24 fiscal year, the NCAA raked in almost $1.4 billion in revenue, a $91 million increase from the prior year. And in 2023, Division I schools spent over $3.6 billion on coaches' salaries, making up the largest spending category of these schools' athletic finances. College athletes are understandably looking for ways to level the playing field and gain more of a voice. Unfortunately, some of my colleagues have pushed to unilaterally prevent any college athlete from being designated as an employee. This measure would essentially grant the NCAA a blank check to avoid all responsibility for employment liability and allow rampant mistreatment of athletes without recourse. Additionally, providing any special carve-out to the NCAA where college athletes would be exempt from employee classification would inevitably rob athletes of rights to which they are entitled, while also creating a new category outside of traditional employment that would be ripe for exploitation and abuse. We should not be in the business of creating loopholes that allow athletes to be exploited, potentially harming their health and safety. Many of us on this side are not advocating to broadly classify all college athletes as employees. We recognize that there is a large spectrum of college athletics, and that some programs have greater resources and exert more control over athletes than others, particularly concerned about money and support from the major sports, football and basketball, to minor sports, which are such a big part of the college environment and athletics. That is why, in many ways, our existing labor and employment laws are rooted in a fact-specific analysis. This is a complicated issue that only grows more complex as the years go on and college sports industry gets bigger and bigger. That being said, if an athlete meets the legal standard of being an employee as set out in the Fair Labor Standards Act and the National Labor Relations Act, then that athlete should be afforded the same considerations and protections of any other employee, including the protected right to form a union and bargain for better conditions and a greater share of the product, which is enormous, of their labor. Even President Trump appointed Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh stated, quote, "College and student athletes could potentially engage in collective bargaining or seek some other negotiated agreement to provide student athletes a fair share of the revenues that they generate for their colleges," end quote from Justice Kavanaugh. College athletes should be treated with fairness and dignity. I hope we can have a constructive conversation about this today. And as I've said, it's complicated. One rule doesn't apply, except that if you're clearly an employee by federal law, then you are an employee. Finally, I think it's important to acknowledge the broader context in which this hearing is happening. Last month, the President issued an executive order dismantling the Department of Education and cutting its workforce in half. This decision seems bound to impact the department work administrating student loans and Pell Grants, among other key areas. In the coming weeks, my Republican colleagues on this committee are likely to cut critical student loan programs, hopefully they will not, to help finance their multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for the wealthy. In the next month or so, college students will be graduating and entering a working world that is currently being thrown into chaos thanks to the administration's regressive tariffs that economists fear could spur a recession. College athletes and all college students and their families could suffer real harm from these decisions. We must be thoughtful when we make these decisions, and we cannot divorce the conversation we're having today from the policies being pursued by the administration. I thank the chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the ranking member. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, Committee Rule 8C, all members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. 14 days after this hearing. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material noted during the hearing to be submitted for the original hearing record. I will now turn to the introduction of our four distinguished witnesses. The first witness is Daniel L. Nash, a shareholder of Littler, a law firm here in Washington, D.C. Our second witness is Mrs. Morgan Wynn, a former softball student athlete at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and I understand y'all won a lot of championships there. Thank you. I congratulate you on that. Our third witness is Mr. Ramoji Huma, the Executive Director of the National College Players Association in Norco, California. Our last witness is Mrs. Jackie McWilliams Parker, the Commissioner for the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association in Charlotte, North Carolina. We thank the witnesses for being here today, and we look forward to your testimony. Pursuant to committee rules, I would ask that you each limit your oral presentation to a 3-minute summary of your written statement. The clock will count down from 3 minutes as committee members have many questions for you, and we would like to spend as much time as possible on those questions. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, however, we will not cut off your testimony until you reach the 5-minute mark. I would also like to remind the witnesses to be aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee. I will first recognize Mr. Nash for your opening testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Allen, Ranking Member DeSagne, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today, particularly concerning the question whether students who participate in intercollegiate athletics should be treated as employees of their schools. I am a lawyer that has practiced labor and employment law for over 30 years, particularly in the sports industry, including in matters both involving professional sports and college athletics. Until recently, the question was well settled under our labor and employment laws. Historically, participation in college athletics has never been deemed to create an employment relationship between the students and their schools. Rather, intercollegiate sports have always been viewed no differently than the many other extracurricular activities in which students participate as an important part of their college education. However, as this subcommittee knows, in recent years, the colleges and universities have faced considerable litigation, some of it existential, claiming that college athletes should be paid and entitled to join labor unions. In my view, there's been a great deal of misunderstanding in these cases about the law and their implications for student athletes and their schools. And in that regard, let me just suggest a few points worth keeping in mind during today's hearing. First, and perhaps most importantly, we should be clear about which students we are talking about and which student athletes have been largely ignored in this debate. It's no secret that the effort to reclassify student athletes have primarily concerned two and only two sports, and that is football and basketball. And the argument in these cases has been that the law should be changed for these student athletes because the amount of revenue in those sports has changed. And it is unfair for those students not to share in that revenue in the same way that professional athletes do. The argument has been they are really professional athletes. However, as a matter of labor and employment law, revenue has never been a factor, never, in determining whether someone should be classified as an employee. And the arguments about fairness ignore that, unlike a commercial business whose revenue is distributed to its shareholders as profit, the revenue received by colleges and universities related to sports like football and basketball helps provide scholarships and other financial support to all of their student athletes, including the many Olympic and women's sports programs. Second, the suggestion that student athletes should be permitted to engage in collective bargaining under a professional sports model simply misunderstands how collective bargaining works under the labor laws. The NLRB recognized this in the Northwestern case in making it clear that a single school's team having collective bargaining would not be viable, and there would be no plausible way to have a broader unit of collective bargaining because many of the colleges and universities are public, are religiously affiliated, and outside the NLRB's jurisdiction. And finally, I want to emphasize one important point. I do not believe that it is helpful to frame the arguments surrounding the status of student athletes under the labor laws as either pro-union or anti-union. I've worked very closely with, and I respect the unions in the professional sports leagues who ably represent those athletes. But the young students who attend college and participate in extracurricular activities, including intercollegiate sports, are not remotely equivalent to professional athletes. And treating them as such would not solve the issues facing college sports. In fact, I believe the opposite is true, and that Congress should make clear that students who participate in intercollegiate sports are not employees of their colleges and universities. I look forward to the subcommittee's questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nash. I now recognize Mrs. Nguyen for your testimony.
Chairman Allen, Ranking Member DeSaulnier, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. My time as a softball student athlete at Oklahoma State was about more than just athletic success. It was about the relationships I built, the lessons I learned, and the constant support system that shaped me into the person I am today. I fear that shifting student athletes into an employment model would erode the very essence of what makes college athletics so transformative. My experience at OSU was rooted in a culture of academic support, athletic excellence, and personal development, values that should be protected and preserved for generations of student athletes to come. As an underclassman, I struggled not just on the field, but in ways beyond the game, especially as a 17-year-old first-generation college student. When I entered the transfer portal, I saw an environment where I could thrive not just as an athlete, but as a student and a person, and OSU provided exactly that. I found a coaching staff that prioritized our academics and our futures, ensuring that our education remained the foundation of our experience. Unlike some programs where academic choices are restricted, my teammates and I were empowered to pursue any major and career path we desired. Practice schedules were built around our class commitments, demonstrating our coaches' genuine care for our futures beyond the game. Because of this, I was named an academic All-American and graduated in the top 1% of my senior class in 2023. But more than just academic and athletic success, what defined my time at OSU was the culture of trust, respect, and open communication. Our coaches curated a sense of family and camaraderie that is something I cherish and I deeply fear may be lost if student athletes transition into an employment model. As former co-chair of Division I Student Athlete Advisory Committee and a current Board of Governors voting member, I visited with hundreds of athletes across the divisions virtually and in person on this subject. I've truly witnessed firsthand the fear and uncertainty this conversation brings to athletes across the country. It's easy to frame this issue as one of fairness and of athletes getting what they deserve, but the reality is that many mid-major institutions and non-revenue sports simply do not have the financial resources to sustain an employment model. This conversation isn't just about the implications for current student athletes. It's about the generations of student athletes who will come after us. If schools are forced to cut sports to afford employment costs, we are losing life-changing and transformational opportunities for thousands of aspiring NCAA athletes. The collegiate model, while imperfect, has provided so many of us the chance to pursue both an education and the sport we love. We should be working to enhance support and resources for student athletes, not implementing a system that could limit access and opportunity. I urge decision makers to truly listen to the voices of those who will be impacted the most. College athletics should not be dictated by financial gain alone or reduced to a business transaction, silencing the voices of the majority. We cannot afford to lose what makes this experience so invaluable: the education, the growth, and the chance to be a part of something bigger. It should be protected and preserved with this at the forefront of our minds. Thank you.
Next, I recognize Mr. Huma for your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Ramogi Huma. I'm a former UCLA football player and the executive director of the NCPA, the National College Players Association. The NCPA is a nonprofit advocacy organization with a mission to protect future, current, and former college athletes of all sports. The NCPA has spearheaded the college athletes' rights movement since its launch in 2001. First, I'd like to thank Chairman Wahlberg and Allen and Ranking Members Scott and DeSaulnier for inviting me to testify today. College sports is an $18 billion a year industry where men's basketball coaches can earn $9 million per year, football coaches can make $13 million per year, and even athletic directors now make more than $3 million per year. The NCAA, conferences, and schools are enriching themselves while working to strip equal rights and deny basic protections from college athletes whose talents generate this revenue. The NCPA continues to advocate that college athletes deserve equal rights under the law. Ensuring all Americans have equal rights under the law should not be a matter of debate. This includes labor law. However, it's important to highlight that college athlete employment status and collective bargaining is not an urgent issue. There are no active NLRB cases, and any new case would take many, many years to resolve. However, there are urgent issues in college sports that Congress should address immediately. NCAA sports is a predatory industry that exploits college athletes physically, sexually, and economically. To date, the NCAA and conferences refuse to impose any consequences for personnel who kill an athlete in a hazardous workout, sexually abuse an athlete, or force an athlete with a concussion back into the same game. I've met too many grieving, devastated parents, like the parents of Calvin Dickey Jr. and Jordan McNair, who died preventable deaths in NCAA football workouts at Bucknell University and the University of Maryland. I don't want to have any more conversations from survivors like former San Jose State gymnast Amy LeClaire, whose team athletic trainer sexually abused her and other female athletes for 14 years under the guise of medical treatment while their university failed to adequately respond to the request for help. We've all read the headlines of hundreds of college athletes at colleges who have suffered the same fate, while the NCAA and conferences turn a blind eye. And make no mistake, these abuses are they're not rare, they're rampant. In surveys, half of Division I athletic trainers report being pressured by coaches to play athletes before they're ready, and returning players with concussions to the same game. About 20% of coaches return athletes to play who are deemed medically ineligible. And more than 1 in 4 college athletes report being sexually assaulted or harassed by a campus authority figure. All legal pathways to address these serious problems should be available to athletes: federal and state legislation, judicial action, and a path toward collective bargaining. The solution certainly won't come from the NCAA, which coldly asserts that it has no duty to protect college athletes. This is an indefensible position, but it begs the question, who is responsible? Because universities that are abusing athletes receive federal funds, it's the NCPA's position that Congress shares responsibility in addressing these issues. Instead of solving these issues, the NCAA and conferences are now demanding Congress eliminate athletes' ability to collectively bargain for these protections. They're also demanding Congress enshrine into federal law exploitative restrictions included in the House versus NCAA lawsuit settlement. The parties are actually trying to liken this terrible settlement to a collective bargaining agreement. No pro-athlete union in America would agree to these terms. This supposed collective bargaining agreement includes no safety standards, no medical coverage, $0 in guaranteed money, loopholes that can ban all athlete NIL compensation from universities, the elimination of about $2 billion in NIL pay from collectives so schools can re-monopolize money from athletic boosters, and a requirement that participating universities cut their rosters. It's a requirement. These unfair terms only underscore why college athletes should have a seat at the table and why Congress should intervene to help. The NCAA and conferences need accountability from Congress on these issues, not a bailout. The NCPA requests that Congress only pass legislation to adopt broad-based reform, including the enforcement of safety standards to prevent serious injury, abuse, and death among college athletes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Huma. Lastly, I recognize Mrs. McWilliams-Parker for your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Allen, Ranking Member DeSaulnier, and distinguished subcommittee members. My name is Jackie McWilliams-Parker, and for more than 3 decades, my life has been immersed in college athletics. As a student athlete, a coach, and now a commissioner of the Central Intercollegiate Athletic Association, I've experienced the life-changing power of college sports in so many ways. My mission is to ensure college sports continues to create opportunities for generations like it once created for me. As commissioner of the CIAA, first established HBCU conference, one of 4 conferences of historically black colleges and universities, it is our responsibility as leaders to be gatekeepers to protect and advocate for our member institutions and student athletes in our conferences. That's why I'm here today, to express my great desire for Congress to pass legislation that supports a future for college sports that allows athletic departments of all sizes and varieties, including HBCUs, to thrive. In recent years, there's been a massive and long overdue effort to elevate and support and the benefits provided to our student athletes, including expanded scholarship guarantees, the creation of a new post-eligibility health insurance program, and enhanced access to academic and career services. Meeting the needs of our student athletes remains an ongoing effort. Progress has been tremendous, and the commitment from college sports leaders to driving continued change runs deep. But as these positive changes have moved forward, it's become clear that there are limits to what we in college sports alone can address. And I'm greatly concerned that without congressional action, policies that negatively impact the student athlete's experience and financial viability of our HBCUs are at risk of taking hold. In particular, there are 2 areas where I believe congressional action is essential to assuring college sports provides opportunities for schools and sports of all types. First, we need to confirm that student athletes are not employees. Unlike the large institutions that generate significant revenue through media rights, sponsorships, and ticket sales, HBCUs often struggle to cover the full cost of athletic programs. Transitioning student athletes to an employment model would exacerbate the strain and deficit on our already strapped athletic department budgets, likely leading to downgrading or outright eliminating certain sports or reducing the number of scholarships and other resources available to student athletes. Second, we need to ensure that NCAA receives sufficient limited liability protection so that it can perform its purpose, working with student athletes, member institutions, and conferences like mine to make and enforce basic rules to determine student athlete eligibility limits, and so that schools across the country are competing on a level playing field. So much of my life story is a testament to the power of college sports, and it's a privilege to be here today to advocate for HBCUs and future generations of student athletes. Thank you for the opportunity to share my voice.
Thank you, Mrs. McWilliams-Parker. Under Committee Rule 9, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mrs. Wynn, you said in your written testimony that as former co-chair of Division I Student Athletic Advisory Committee, you had the opportunity to speak with hundreds of student athletes who expressed fears about what employment status could mean for them and the future of college sports. What were some of the top concerns you heard from your peers?
Thank you for the question. The top concern from the student athletes I've spoken to is the ongoing threat of cutting athletic opportunity for thousands of student athletes to pay for the student athletes that generate the most revenue, which would ultimately create an uneven playing field between the athletes. Another fear is the potential decline in the prioritization of academics. Most student athletes who play in college do not go on to play professionally and choose their schools to pursue academics. We fear becoming employees would put a substantial emphasis on job security through athletic performance over the current academic eligibility-centric model.
Thank you. Mr. Nash, like other college students, student athletes must satisfy certain academic standards to gain admission to their universities and to participate in extracurricular activities, including their sport. If student athletes are deemed to be employees under the National Labor Relations Act, could grade point averages or course credit requirements become subjects of collective bargaining?
Thank you, Chairman Allen. We don't know the answer to that, and nor do the advocates of converting student athletes to employees and attempting to have collective bargaining. It is certainly conceivable that the academic rules that apply to student athletes and how they're enforced, and other rules related to their education and the academic environment would be subjects of bargaining. Those are things that are just simply not present in the professional sports league.
Okay. Could this unionization undermine academic standards? In other words, the young people would prioritize their work responsibilities over actually getting an education when less than 2% of these young people go on to play in professional sports?
I think the reality of that is probably obvious, right? I think almost certainly if we're talking about what is essentially making the student athletes on these sports as professionals, that's going to be the focus, not academics.
Right. Thank you. Mrs. McWilliams-Parker, fewer than 2% of NCAA student athletes turn professional in their respective sports, as I mentioned earlier. What impact would employee status have on ensuring these college athletes can continue to focus first and foremost on being students and on their academic success to make sure that they have successful careers after college?
Look, this conversation about, particularly for our HBCUs and our smaller institutions, I mean, I'm highly concerned about employment because the fact of the matter, our institutions were built in this country to give us an education. Athletics is an ancillary opportunity to allow our students to engage way beyond just getting their degree. making them employees or changing that status. It really changes the opportunities that we get to create at our institutions and our smaller schools, being able to give them the resources that they need for academic support, for travel, for uniforms, all those things that are important and necessary, especially for students that are first-generational students. So I hope we never lose the focus of why education was established in this country in the first place. Athletics has just been the benefit that we all have. It's a privilege to be able to be a college student athlete, and I hope we don't take that away from them.
Yes, so many young people have been able to get their education and also participate in their sport of choice on the field, and then go on to very successful careers. And whatever we do as members of Congress, we want to keep that as the first priority. And I think that's it behind the scenes here. We're putting other things first, like, you know, collective bargaining, unionization, and employee status, and, you know, all these other things. And I think we got to work to make sure that academics is priority one. I will yield then to the ranking member for your question. Oh, okay. Ms. McBath, I'm sorry. Ms. McBath, I recognize you for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chair, and Ranking Member DeSaulnier for hosting this hearing. And to our witnesses that are here with us this morning, thank you so much for taking the time to testify. College athletics have such an important place in our education system and American society. They represent more than just a sports team. They carry the legacy of a town, an institution, and a past player's dreams and accomplishments. These things are incredibly meaningful, and we need to be sure that nothing that we do here in Congress will further complicate things for folks back home or put these opportunities further out of reach for students and their families. Student athletes must be treated with the dignity and the respect that they deserve. They must be fairly compensated for their efforts while ensuring that schools, both large and both small, can continue to provide the high-quality education and athletic opportunities for our students. Athletic scholarships have and continue to play a very important role in making sure that every student who wants to better themselves through higher education has an opportunity to do so without going into a lifetime of debt, regardless of how much money their parents make or whether anyone in their family has ever been to college before. They are directly responsible for helping people lift themselves up from lower income levels and into a better quality of life, sometimes breaking generational cycles of poverty. While most student athletes may not go on to play professional sports, all of them will be more likely able to finish their degree and have the skills that are necessary to provide a decent life for themselves after they graduate. They are true engines of social mobility, and it would be devastating to students, families, and athletic programs if athletes had to worry about being taxed on those very scholarships. But that exact proposal is unfortunately being floated by our House Republicans. This memo, circulated by the majority, which I would like to submit digitally for the record, outlines the potential ways that Republicans want to raise revenue this Congress, and you can see that this proposal to make all scholarships income taxable, this is right here, written out on page 11. This proposal would impose a new tax on students and families and force students and athletic recruits with the lowest incomes to reconsider whether or not they can afford to accept a scholarship because of the new tax burden that would come with it. Student athletes should be focused on success on the field and in the classroom, not on whether they will have to pay a new tax on the scholarships that they've earned. Ms. McWilliams-Parker, can you talk about the negative impact that taxing scholarship opportunities would have on student athletes if this proposal by my House Republican colleagues to tax all scholarships were to become law?
Thank you, Ms. Macbeth, for that question. I was a walk-on student athlete at Hampton University. My parents had to pay for me to go to college, and I depended on the package to be a student athlete that year. And I earned a scholarship thereafter. And I think about that question, if we had to tax that scholarship, that is an extra burden on my family. That one that they couldn't afford. They couldn't afford for me to go to Hampton. So the fact of the matter of being able to get a scholarship and able to get the resources that I had on campus was extremely important. We're a smaller institutions. We're Division II. All of our student athlete and scholarship packages in our division. So when you talk about exposure and what we're seeing for football and basketball, that is not the reality of our students and our first generational students at our institutions. There's a need, they need the support. They need the Pell Grants. They need the financial aid. That is part of their scholarship package at our Division II schools. And in Division I, I would imagine that they depend on some of that scholarship money as well. So taxing it is not helping us at all.
Thank you for that. I, too, come from Virginia State University. I graduated there. I'm not going to say when, but that is also a Division II school as well. And so I've spoken with our president there several times, and I understand unequivocally how devastating it would be if we were to tax these scholarships. Also in the state of Georgia, too, we have scholarships that are being taxed as well. So thank you for your testimony.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes Mr. Baumgartner of Washington for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and very much appreciate this distinguished panel and this hearing being held. Trying to restore college sports is one of the reasons I came to Congress, and it's very interesting to me. I certainly don't believe that college athletes are employees, but I also think many of the aspects of collective bargaining should be brought to the results of what would happen with collective bargaining should be brought to the collegiate athlete system. College athletics are highly subsidized public goods, and I think they should be regulated as such. What our goal should be is we have more money in the system now, but we have less athletic opportunities than ever before. What our underlying principle should be is to create new opportunities, both for the benefit of the student athletes, but in this day and age, as American society becomes more political and more partisan, there's an important piece of social cohesion and camaraderie and societal benefit that just comes from everything that we love about college athletics. And so I think it needs to be restored. Personally, I think the NCAA is a defunct and derelict institution. I don't think it can be fixed. I think there needs to be a new institution put under presidential control and authorized by Congress for these public goods. I think there has to be a system of fairness and competitive balance across the system, both the athletes and the schools. And if all the money goes into SEC football and Big Ten football and a little bit to basketball, then the Olympic sport athletes are going to be the ones that are going to suffer. So if we can treat the system equally amongst all sports and all athletes, I think we will get the solution that is in the best public interest. I believe that coaches' salaries need to be capped at 10 times the total cost of the average student going to college. Again, this is not free market, unfettered capitalism. This is a highly subsidized public good. There's not a lot of societal benefit of a football coach making over $10 million a year. What you want is competitive balance. All of us that enjoyed college football, and I grew up watching Power 5 football, it was just as much fun for the fans and the students when the coaches were making $200,000 or $500,000 a year as when they're making $10 million. It's this unfettered arms race and this nonsense like having slides and these ridiculous whirlpool baths and these special chairs in all the locker rooms so they can entice recruits. There's no benefit to you guys as athletes with that. And then finally, the idea that we would have transcontinental conferences where student athletes are a volleyball team is going from Eugene, Oregon to Rutgers in New Jersey midweek, that's insane. That's not what the public wants to pay for. So Congress has all the tools to put this back together. You know, I believe that we should put NIL into a pool and share it equally amongst all athletes. I think we should pool TV revenue for all sports so that your HBCUs are benefiting, and we can create so many opportunities for the sons and daughters of American taxpayers and as we restore this system. You know, to my question, Ms. Wine, do you believe, you know, the future young ladies like yourselves playing softball right now, I mean, what needs to happen so that there would be more opportunities for young ladies like yourself and not less? And do you worry when you watch all the money going into football and men's basketball that there's going to be less opportunities for young ladies like yourself?
Thank you for the question. I do worry about the future of my own sport. I worry about the future of all female sports in this conversation. I dreamed as a little kid that I would get to play at the World Series, and fortunately enough, I went to 2. And I think that every young softball player now should continue to have that dream and not have to worry that those opportunities won't be created for them or still there for them. I can't give you the best solution, in my opinion, for this, just because I'm here to talk about how my experience as a student athlete. But I do think that there needs to be a balance.
Well, you know, I hope we have a unique opportunity, I think, in a bipartisan fashion, you know, with this president. Again, these are public goods. If we regulate them in a public manner, highly subsidized public goods, we realize that if we could have and it rises, I believe, to the importance of a presidential appointee and then authorized by Congress, we can get the NCAA out of all this business, put the proper role with Congress authorizing these things, and have more money. Again, we have more money in the system and less opportunities than ever before. If Congress takes action, we can have more opportunities for our athletes and maintain the competitive balance across the system. And I yield back. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Now I recognize the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Representative Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will say that I never thought that I would hear a Republican colleague call for socialism and redistribution of wealth and resources. But I'm excited to hear that such proposals do exist on the other side. But I just want to say that if you have been watching college basketball's March Madness tournament, like I have been for the last few weeks, then it should already be clear why college athletes deserve the right to organize and bargain collectively. But in case you haven't been paying attention, I would like to take just a moment to break some of it down. March Madness packed 67 men's and 63 women's basketball games into an action-packed 21 days. This year, for the second year in a row, this college basketball tournament generated around $1 billion in revenue for the NCAA. With such high revenue, you might assume that players get a nice cut of that action, but your assumption would, of course, be wrong. While the schools behind successful women's basketball and women's basketball programs are splitting $15 million in prize money, and the schools of the successful men's team will share around $216 million, their triumphant college athletes will walk away completely empty-handed. Beyond prize money, many schools will make millions of dollars off of these young people's backs. Last year, the Power 5 conferences generated over $3.5 billion in revenue. You heard that, $1 billion with a B. While the NCAA and athletic conferences raked in billions, the outlook for the college athletes who made them their money is grim. In a 2019 survey, almost 25% of Division I athletes reported experiencing food insecurity. In the last month, and nearly 14% were homeless over the last year. A study published by Idaho State University in 2022 found that more than half of the Division I student athletes surveyed reported eating less often than they felt they should because there was not access to enough food. I request unanimous consent to enter into the record an article by Wisconsin Public Radio titled, "Survey of Nearly a Quarter of Division I Athletes Face Food Insecurity."
Without objection, it'll be entered.
Thank you. Mr. Huma, can you speak about the financial strain that far too many athletes face?
You know, it's funny, this organization, my organization, started out as a student group at UCLA when I was playing football, and I formed the group after my teammate was suspended because groceries were left on his doorstep when he was broke and hungry. And meanwhile, they were selling his jersey in the store. They said it was an NIL violation. You couldn't have any benefit at all outside of what a regular student would have received. So this entire movement, much of it, at least my part and my organization's part, stemmed from food and groceries. You may have assumed that I played receiver or DB. Back in the day, I was a linebacker, and I needed to eat a lot, and I was an undersized linebacker. But I went from eating 5-6 meals a day at home to 3 meals a day in a meal cart at UCLA. Immediately lost, within a month and a half, lost 10 pounds. I'm trying to hit 300-pounders at 210 pounds. And it was tough. So fast forward to the surveys you're talking about, unfortunately, much of this hasn't changed. We did a study several years ago on what a full scholarship, the room and board included, what that would provide an athlete to live off of, and found that 80% of athletes would be living below the federal poverty line on those scholarships. In the backdrop, all the numbers you mentioned, all the revenue that these athletes are generating, obviously, you talk about the motivations and people wanting to find some way to change the system, whether it be collective bargaining, employee status. All options need to be on the table to make sure that athletes are treated fairly.
Thank you so much. Despite the incredible financial hardship experienced by many Division I athletes, the NCAA has long argued that the system is fair because they're student athletes and often get the value of educational scholarships at their institutions, so the free housing that we talked about, the free meal plan. However, Mr. Huma, I'm not sure if most Americans realize that college athletes like Division I football, basketball, and volleyball players are managing the equivalent of a full-time job on top of their academics. While the public only sees them for a couple hours on television, athletes are putting in countless hours throughout the week. Very quickly, could you just describe what a typical schedule of a D1 athlete would look like?
Well, first of all, it's year-round, year-round. You see them during the season on game day, maybe on TV, but it's year-round workouts, early morning rises, you finish late. The Pac-12 did a survey of their athletes, and the average athlete across all sports reported spending 50 hours a week on their sport alone. Wow. So yes, full-time job, absolutely.
And then a full-time student as well.
Correct.
Thank you. Based on on the schedule you're describing, is it realistic to think that most D1 athletes can equally balance school and athletics while in session?
No. I mean, athletics takes priorities, and in terms of degree completion, which is one of the goals for us to improve, they need more time to graduate on the back end. They need less time, less responsibilities put on their shoulders while they're athletes. And without that, you're going to continue to have lower graduation rates than you otherwise would.
Thank you, Mr. Huma. As many of my colleagues have pointed out, a one-size-fits-all regulatory approach may prove difficult given the diverse portfolio of sports, divisions, and athletic conferences the NCAA represents, but giving these young people the right to bargain for better wages and hours and work conditions isn't that difficult. It's long past time that we cut the games and start calling out this billion-dollar business for what it is, student-athlete exploitation. I thank you all so much for your testimony and for being with us today, and I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, and I recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. I'm glad the subcommittee is holding this hearing to discuss the future of college athletics. I don't see the future as bright if we don't get some control and understanding what athletics are for. And as a former athlete myself, not at the highest level, but the impact in my life was very positive. The athletics encouraged my academics, which was the highest priority. Ms. Swin, I appreciated your testimony. That really is the essence of athletics and scholarship. Before I ask questions to our witnesses, I did want to bring up one college sports-related issue that I've heard a lot about from my constituents. Division I and II college athletes who are awarded scholarships at our universities are increasingly coming from other countries. According to NCAA data, international student-athlete participation has increased by 145% since 2001. One example is Division I men's and women's tennis, where foreign athletes make up over 60% of overall participants. In men's and women's ice hockey, they make up over a third. Sadly, college sports has become big business, and there's an increasing pressure to recruit foreign athletes to make money and win games. Unfortunately, these scholarship opportunities have come at the expense of American-born student athletes. This is additionally troublesome because in the United States, college athletics partially serve as America's Olympic development program. In the 2024 Paris Olympics, 65% of the U.S. Olympic team were current, former, or incoming NCAA student athletes. The increasing number of foreign athletes in college sports jeopardizes opportunities for American athletes and the global competitiveness of our athletic programs. Having said that, Mr. Nash, proponents of classifying student athletes as employees have cited the substantial amount of revenue that certain college sports programs bring in and the potential for revenue sharing with these athletes as reasons for employment status. What does the law say regarding whether revenue generation is a factor in determining employment status?
Thank you. The law has been very clear that the amount of revenue that an organization receives is not a factor in determining whether someone is or is not an employee. Otherwise, if it was, businesses that lose money could claim that they shouldn't have to pay their employees. What matters, and the Supreme Court has made this clear many times, is whether someone meets the test or the definition of a common law employee. Student athletes for decades have been recognized as not meeting that test. And the fact that revenue has increased in sports like football or basketball shouldn't be a basis for changing that law.
Yeah, appreciate that. Ms. McWilliams-Parker, in your written testimony, you state that reclassifying student athletes as employees would place an even greater strain on already strapped athletic department budgets. What are some of the measures that athletic departments may have to take in response to an employment model?
For our member institutions, and I would just speak for my colleagues as HBCUs, I mean, our conversation is, will we be able to sustain sports? Will we be able to continue to give scholarships? Will we have to reduce that? I think there's a high concern that we're already operating in deficit, so all this money and revenue we're hearing about, that's not funneling to smaller division schools, Division II schools. All the gate receipts that you see, we're all running deficits. And there would be a concern that we wouldn't be able to keep up. And so eliminating sports, and as we know, sometimes the Olympic sports and women's sports go first. And that would be tragic to see when that opportunity for myself and Ms. Nguyen, those are the concerns that we have. We can't keep up with the masses of what you all are talking about. We just want to give these students an opportunity, like I had, to play their sport and to be able to get their college degree and to represent like Ms. Macbeth is today and myself.
As a student athlete, why did you undertake athletics with the purpose of being a student?
As I heard a student say the other day, and as I would say, sports saved my life. It gave me an opportunity that nothing else did. I could have done a lot of different things, but it was the pathway for my family, for me to get a college degree and to be able to make impact and to be prepared to be a commissioner today. I'm no different than any of my other colleagues. I just have a smaller representation of what you all see on a broader side of what you watched in March Madness. So the opportunity to play sport and to have teammates and to lead and to guide and to go through that strenuous work every single day has been necessary. Thank you.
My time has expired, but I wanted to hear that. You wanted to be a student athlete, but student first.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I recognize Ranking Member Bobby Scott from Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. McWilliams-Parker, you mentioned the CIAA in terms of revenue. Do the teams make a lot of money for the schools?
No.
Is that typical for D2 and D3 schools?
Very typical.
Do you pay your coaches millions of dollars a year?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Mr. Huma, you mentioned the schedule for a typical athlete. After college, or after their eligibility ends, what happens to those students?
Well, it depends. Some graduate, some don't. You know, with the reality is that universities recruit these athletes. Some of them are less prepared academically than regular students. That's just a fact. But those universities still have a responsibility to create a realistic pathway for them to graduate. And unfortunately, many of them don't. So you have increased time demands when it comes with athletics, put on the shoulders of students who are less prepared. And oftentimes you get poor graduation rates. Many of these athletes that generate all this money in Division I, they don't graduate. And although there's a lot of verbal promises, there's no teeth for schools to actually allow them to complete their degree. And many athletes don't have the opportunity. So after that, don't really know. But, you know, that's kind of the scenario.
Yes, some go into professional sports. How many turn pro?
Less than 2%.
So the other 98%,
The other 98%, they pour all their heart and soul into generating this money, but not all of them graduate.
now is it possible for to be an employee under the National Labor Relations Act and not under the Fair Labor Standards Act, where you could have a voice as a union, but not have the burden on the school for minimum wage, overtime, and other things?
It is possible. Every school would have, every team would have its own test. You know, just because, let's say, Dartmouth or USC athletes, football, basketball players are recognized as employees, it doesn't automatically mean anyone in Division II or even other Division I teams or sports would be recognized as employees. They'd have to, first of all, the athletes would have to want to join a union. If one team had a union, it doesn't automatically place everyone else in a union. Secondly, if a school did have a team where there was a union, say Division II even, the school doesn't have to enter into a collective bargaining agreement if it feels like it can't afford what the athletes are asking for. It's an agreement. Two sides have to agree. So, and I would also point out that none of the employment issues involving the NLRB affect Division II. There's no campaigns. Division II really has not been in the, I guess, crosshairs, if you can say. But, you know, if they were, at that point, the point is that universities don't have to agree to do anything they can't afford. And again, athletes have, if a softball player at Oklahoma State doesn't want to be in a union, they don't have to be. But for those that feel like there's a need, whether it be health and safety, whether it be compensation issues, they should have the option to do that if by law, if the law recognizes them as employees.
They could bargain for workers' compensation coverage for injuries. What happens now with if an athlete is injured?
Right now, it depends on the school. The school, it's always optional. You know, in Division I, they've passed what is another unenforced standard. You know, there are safety guidelines that aren't enforced. Division I recently said any Division I school is supposed to be able to pay for the medical expenses while the athletes are there. There's nothing enforceable about that. We've had athletes for years come to us with out-of-pocket medical expenses their schools don't cover. Some of those bills go into collections, and they don't find that out until they're trying to buy their first car. So it's a very deceptive industry, but a collective bargaining agreement is a legally binding agreement. If a school says we're going to pay for your medical, then it's ironclad.
What happens to disability?
That's really, you know, there's nothing there for the athletes unless they're catastrophically injured, which means $90,000 in deductible payments, which very few injuries reach. So there's been studies finding that about 50% of Division I athletes across all sports suffer chronic injuries. Most of those athletes have no assistance when they're done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. I recognize the gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Nash, in profit-generating college sports, we already see a trend of student athletes staying long past the typical 4 years of eligibility. This is for some athletes to maximize time in college athletics, to profit as long as possible, as if it were a full-time job. How might this problem be exacerbated if all student athletes are considered employees?
Thank you for the question. I think there would be a real danger in that problem being exacerbated because there would, one subject of collective bargaining, if it were to be allowed, would be to remove the eligibility rules and demand that student athletes be able to participate as long as they like. It would be a potential subject of bargaining.
What impact do you believe this trend has on the overall educational mission of universities?
Well, I think there's no question that the movement to reclassifying student athletes as employees has a significant potential to interfere with education. We've seen that in the cases that have been brought before the NLRB. We saw that in the USC case, where the general counsel of the NLRB challenged the USC student athlete handbook, which provided the students with guidance on on how to deal with interviews and social media and encourage them to speak positively about their teammates and be careful about not posting things that could follow you for life. According to the NLRB and the complaint that they issued against the USC, that violated the labor laws if they were employees.
Thank you. Ms. Wynn, some have noted that the trend of professional student athletes could lead to fewer roster spots for freshmen or transfers. As a former student athlete, does this trend concern you?
I think that this trend does concern me, and it concerns my counterparts, other student athletes, because we are not in favor of cutting athletic opportunity.
So in your written testimony, you mentioned the importance of academics during your time as a student athlete at Oklahoma State University. Can you discuss your academic experience as a student athlete? And as part of that, how might the importance of academics change if student athletes are deemed to be employees?
My academic experience was certainly a high point of my career. I studied strategic communications in undergrad, and during that time, my coach also was very supportive of joining extracurricular clubs as well. So I had the ability to join an advertising club in my college. My coaches took academics very seriously. When we were playing on the road, we had study halls on the road with each other, and even our academic advisors would travel with us to ensure that we had the most adequate resources at all times. And they demonstrated a very healthy balance between my athletic experience and my academic experience.
Well, that's wonderful to hear that there was that emphasis on your academics. Ms. McWilliams-Parker, academic achievement and professional development have been the primary purpose of post-secondary education and the student-athlete experience. What educational and other benefits do student-athletes gain from their athletic experience, and how does this experience help them in their future careers?
I would say that the whole team concept of being on a team, that experience by itself is pretty powerful. You learn leadership, you learn perseverance. I mean, even in these discussions of injury and being hungry and all those other things, I mean, there is something about athletics that defines who we are as a country and as we are as a community, and to provide access and opportunity for our student athletes, whether it's careers. I mean, part of my institution helped me get a postgraduate scholarship to go get my degree at Temple. I've never had to pay for college except that 1 year that I talked about as a walk-on. Careers, as we have partners and sponsors. I mean, we have pathways to help them get internships and those types of opportunities. So there's just so many benefits of being a student athlete, not just on the court, but also off the court. And as leaders and administrators, we have that responsibility to support that effort.
Well, thank you very much. My grandson was on the track team. He was a thrower in high school and in college. And I think he learned a lot about teamwork, and he also said, if the coach told him, if you show up on time, you're late, show up 10 minutes early. That is a wonderful characteristic to have in our country. Absolutely. Thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
I thank the gentlelady, and I recognize the ranking member, Representative DeSaulnier from California.
Thank you. I want to thank all the witnesses again, a terrific testimony. Mr. Huma, a lot has changed other than you've gone from a linebacker's build and 5 meals a day to 3 in a DB. But could you talk a little bit about, I mean, in sports, there's been lots of arguments for decades about what is an amateur, whether it's the Olympics or college athletics, and what's a professional. What has changed from your perspective to make this a more acute need to define the boundaries of professionalism and amateurism?
Thanks for that question. I think, today, the high revenue college sports are almost indistinguishable from the pros. Obviously, college is involved, but besides that, again, it was mentioned just yesterday, there was a hearing. Because there was legal pressure, again, one of the avenues to fight against this injustice, the NCAA Power 5 conferences are being pushed to finally share revenue with athletes. And as we speak right now, there's recruits 16, 17 years old being signed by schools right now to professional agreements. So, and that's a good thing. That's a great development. And that's now something even the schools are celebrating. They kind of have to because they have no choice, but hey, we're there. And that was because athletes' rights were not taken away by Congress. And I will point out, as an athlete, all the athletes we work with, there are very special things about college sports. But amateurism has nothing to do with it. Has nothing to do with it. You can learn leadership if you're an employee. You can learn all the different things we're talked about today, teamwork, camaraderie. That doesn't go away because someone has rights, because someone's an employee. The ability to play at a high level and pursue a degree, that's really what makes college sports special. And I think if you dissect what everyone's talking about here, that's what is there. The employee status issue does not negate that. It doesn't take away from being a student. You have students in bookstores at all the schools we're talking about. They're employees. You have some students on these campuses that actually have the right to form a union. But we're not here talking about that. This is about taking away rights from athletes so that they're not empowered to make the changes this industry has never wanted to make. The first year that we actually announced what we were doing, within months, 3 football players died in the off-season workouts. And since then, there's been death after death after death. You can set your watch to it. That's the very next year I testified in Congress, 2002, begging Congress, please do something. And nothing's been done. And there's been individuals that have talked about it. And I was really in agreement with much of what Congressman Baumgartner said today. Congress, you have the votes. You can solve these issues. And this is what I'm here pleading for on behalf of all the families that have suffered and the families that will suffer if Congress doesn't act.
So my district is next to the mothership of the University of California. So when I talk to people in the football program at Berkeley, or I have a very dear friend who's coach of the rugby team, sort of the rugby program in the United States, this challenge doesn't, to Mr. Baumgartner's comments, and Mr. Nash's too, there seems to be an ability to fix this. The idea of pooling the revenue to make sure that these minor sports, and that's a misnomer from my perspective, having been a lacrosse player many years ago, to get all the benefits that you've talked about. So there does, in your comments about your agreement, I'm in agreement too. But beyond that is these questions, and we've always sort of mythologized the Rudies of the world, but then underlying, and that's not just unique to college athletics, there are the issues you mentioned about sexual exploitation, harassment, just harassment of people who are in the program anyways. But defining that as opposed to what Ms. Williams talked about is dealing with adversity, that's legitimate adversity. So there strikes me as sort of the challenge we have here is making this work, but also making sure that some of the cultures that we've unfortunately dealt with for too long don't get addressed and the athletes have a chance to defend themselves as an employee would.
Absolutely. I think there's a big difference between the challenges that make us stronger as a college athlete, dealing with adversity within a normal realm, but that adversity should not include sexual assault. And UC Berkeley, that was one of, I could have listed names, but UC Berkeley, 2014, Ted Agu passed away. The university admitted negligence. Now, the trainer that oversaw that workout was the same trainer at Central Florida just a few years before that oversaw another workout death among similar circumstances, sickle cell, which is completely preventable. And that trainer could be anywhere today. So that is not the type of adversity that people can walk off. That family's devastated. Ted's gone.
Thank you. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I recognize the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today. Really, what I want to talk about is the difference between employment status and non-employment status for the athletes. So if you could start, and Ms. Wynn, I'll start with you. What is the advantage of making student athletes employees versus non-employees, or disadvantage from your perspective?
From my perspective, I think that employment status yields more disadvantages than they do advantages because the majority of us student athletes, and I'm here representing the female student athletes and Olympic sports as well. And I think that employment status it will shift the freedom for student athletes to explore academic interests, transfer capabilities, or just playing for the love of the game, and replace that with legal contracts, performance pressures, financial decisions. And I know myself, I signed my NLI at 16 years old, and so I was very young, and I started my freshman year as a 17-year-old student. So opening those conversations even to minors, I feel like that's a dangerous future, in my opinion.
Okay. I mean, yesterday, in your order to protect the balance, right, I introduced the Protecting Student Athletes Economic Freedom Act, which clarifies that a student athlete is not an employee of a college, conference, or other associations. Ms. McWilliams-Parker, how would, this is kind of awkward, but ununionization of student athletes impact a school's ability to support their students and academic programs?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think about the opportunity to continue to give them scholarships, even the cost of the academic support, the regular mental health services that we have, the training support that is needed, the media support, career development success. I mean, all of those things are going to be possibly compromised because of the cost associated with it from that department, athletics department. I mean, I shared earlier, our departments are already operating in a deficit. So the more strain that we put on financially to provide those resources on top of additional resources, there would be some concern.
But what do you say to the folks that say, but we have to protect these athletes?
I don't know why we don't think we're not protecting them already. I work in college athletics. My job every day is to protect student athletes, give them the best opportunity to participate in championships, and make sure that we have the staffing and the support they need. We're talking about different subsets of institutions. We've got private, we've got public, we've got larger, we got smaller, we got bigger resources, and we've got limited resources. I'm in limited resources. And so we need to protect those limited resources institutions by making sure we can sustain opportunities for students like Miss Wynn who come to some of our schools.
So if I'm understanding it correctly, you think as a student athlete or a former student athlete, being an employee is not a good thing. And as an administrator, you also agree with that.
Absolutely. I mean, we're protecting the Olympic sports, we're protecting Title IX, and Title IX is not about women, it's also about our men. We're trying to protect the disparity of the playing field. I mean, there's a lot of implications here on paying student athletes.
So you actually have some trust in people. You have some trust in the athletes. You have some trust in each other. You don't need Big Brother, in essence, to come in and regulate everything.
Despite what everybody says, I am part of the NCAA. I am the NCAA. I'm one of the administrators that sits around the table like you all do to make policies and processes and procedures so that our institutions and student athletes can have that experience. Our student athletes are around the table, we have leadership around the table, and should we be getting better? Absolutely. Are we getting better? Absolutely. Are these conversations helpful to help us guide in the path of getting better? Absolutely.
So just to be clear, and I'm being a little sarcastic, which I don't mean to be, but you have the athletes who participate, you have the administrators. You mean you actually collaborate to find out what the best course of action is, and you guys can do that right now.
Absolutely,
wow,
we are doing it.
That's great. Good for you. I applaud you.
Thank you.
I mean, I think we need to get back into having a little bit of faith into our people. Thank you. I know I'm over time, Mr. Chairman. I yield back. Thank you all.
Thank the gentlelady. Now I recognize the gentlelady from Connecticut, Representative Hayes.
Thank you, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today to testify. I apologize for coming in late. I'm juggling multiple hearings. College athletics has become a multi-billion-dollar industry, with the National Collegiate Athletic Association, or the NCAA, bringing in nearly $1.4 billion in revenue in 2024. I can tell you that I have absolute faith in college sports, being from the basketball championship of the world, where our UConn women just won a 12th national title It is the only sport we have. Our college athletes is Connecticut sport. I mean, we have Connecticut Sun now, but college athletics is Connecticut sports, and this is a conversation we have often at home. And immediately after that win, one of the things that Coach Ariamo spoke about was the disparities for college athletes. So it is very fitting that we're having this hearing here today. For many young people, an athletic scholarship can be a pathway out of poverty, but a scholarship alone does not help an athlete trying to feed themselves or provide for their families back at home. These scholarships are typically contingent upon an athlete being enrolled as a full-time student and meeting specific academic requirements. Across various sports and divisions, college athletes report spending between 30 to 50 hours a week on athletic activities, despite NCAA caps on the number of hours athletes may engage in, quote, countable athletically related activities. In fact, many athletes report feeling pressured to attend so-called voluntary athletic sessions for fear of retaliation, or they're worried they may lose their spot on their team or incur a broader punishment for their teammates. This is an incredible level of control over how a person spends their time and fulfills the basic requirements of being a member of a team. While a large part of the conversation around college athletics and collective bargaining centers around monetary compensation, a union also provides security for its members when facing excessive demands. Mr. Uma, could you please explain how union representation could help athletes pressured to invest excessive hours in outside activities?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at the pros, they have unions, and I think that many people watching today would love if their sibling, child, if they were in the pros, and they have unions, and they negotiate how long their time demands are on their athletics. So I think, first and foremost, anyone that has concern about the overemphasis of athletics, overcoming academics and affecting graduation rates, has to recognize that the athletes, if they had a union and could collectively bargain, could try to reduce hours that are required of them.
Thank you. There are more than 500,000 NCAA college athletes, but fewer than 2% of them will go on to play sports professionally. The NCAA has pointed this out in social media campaigns in recent years. The demands of an athletic schedule can often stand in the way of a student pursuing internships, career workshops, and other types of training that will help them in their postgraduate years. Every college athlete should have the flexibility to ensure that they can pursue their dreams of playing collegiate sports and invest in their futures after college. Unions provide their members with a seat at the table and can do the same for college athletes. Mr. Uma, what benefits could union representation offer so that college athletes can prioritize their academics and post-college goals while meeting the vigor of an athletic schedule?
And that's a great question. You know, beyond just reducing the time demands, there could be ironclad agreements that ensure that their scholarship isn't revocable at each year, that a coach can't, quote unquote, fire you or run you off, because despite the promises and the rhetoric that if athletes become employees, they can suddenly be fired, they're getting fired all the time for years and years. The coach creates a hostile work environment, breaks the athlete mentally to the point where they want to transfer or quit their sport altogether. That can be negotiated, the terms of whether a person can be fired or not, and that is, as we've mentioned, tied to your educational opportunity. Post eligibility as well. If you need another semester or two to graduate because you've been dealing with such high athletic demands, that could be negotiated. How about an extra couple years to graduate? Again, not as a verbal promise that no one's enforcing, but under an agreement.
Thank you. And like I said, from a state like Connecticut, where college athletes is our sport, they're making big money right now in Connecticut off of this championship. I yield back. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I think the question at this hearing today is whether NCAA college sports are farm teams or mere farm teams for the pros. In Missouri, we have taken a position on this issue. In July of 2023, Governor Mike Parson signed into law legislation clarifying that student athletes at Missouri's colleges and universities are not employees. Mr. Nash, as you point out in your written testimony, there have been efforts in recent years to reclassify student athletes as employees and allow for collective bargaining. Supporters of these efforts often cite professional sports teams as the model. We've heard that quite a bit today. Do you agree with claims that student athletes are no different than professional athletes and should be treated as such in the eyes of the law, especially Division I sports that generate a lot of revenue?
Thank you. No, I don't. I don't think that student athletes at the college level are remotely equivalent to professional athletes, for the simple reason professional athletes are not required or are not admitted as students under academic standards at a university. Their sole focus is to play their sport. A college athlete, and I defer to Ms. Nguyen on this, she's in a better position to speak than me. A college athlete has to be admitted as a student, has to continue to progress towards a degree, and there is a tremendous amount of focus on their education.
Yeah, don't you find it ironic that all this discussion of employment and then unionization, it centers around Division I sports that are profitable, and as you point out, in two sports, basketball and football. What about where's the solicitousness of the workers' rights in all the other sports that aren't profitable?
Well, that's a good question, and that's, I think, probably the biggest problem that I see with the effort to turn student athletes into professionals. It just simply ignores that the arguments that are being made really are focused on just the so-called high revenue sports, and really on just a few individual athletes in those, the sort of professional free agent kind of model, while ignoring all the other sports.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to address. Representative Hayes pointed out, and I'll correct me if this is not correct, that the NCAA had revenues in 2024 of $1.4 billion. Do you know what percentage of athletic programs are profitable? And you could express that any way you wish. It's my understanding that not even all football or basketball programs are profitable to the schools, much less lacrosse, cross-country, wrestling, and so forth.
I defer to the NCAA and the colleges on that, but I
Sure.
think the assumption of your question is actually quite correct. One example I can give you is in the NLRB case involving the University of Southern California. The focus there was on football and basketball, but
Right.
the evidence in the case showed that the revenue from those sports not only supported the more than 20 other sports, the athletic department as a whole, according to the reports that were provided to the education department, operates at a loss. So the revenue did not even support all of the sports and required further assistance, further financial support from the university.
Yes, that's what, when you see a big number like 1.4 billion, okay, that's revenue, what's expense? And then to the extent revenue exceeds expense in the nonprofit world, we don't call that profit, but what is that revenue used for? And other things like supporting the sports that aren't profitable. Mr. Yuma, you cited deaths in college athletics and training and so on. Cause of death generally cardiac issues, heat stroke. What is it generally?
So cardiac, heat illness, sickle cell related, even asthma, things that the deaths we're concerned with are preventable.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes there's risk inherent in sports, but preventable deaths are still around, unfortunately.
Yeah, I am a medical doctor, and I actually have a son with congenital heart disease, and his congenital heart disease was very obvious at birth, but there are congenital heart diseases, some of which can be discovered by pre-screening and precautions taken, and probably in most cases not participating in athletics at that level, among other things. Are you aware, is there screening right now at the NCAA level for these undiagnosed congenital heart problems?
No, but what's interesting is that now they're screening for sickle cell, for instance, right?
Very good.
And that has given the athletic programs the ability to say, hey, this athlete has sickle cell, let's make sure we follow the protocols and workouts. But with Bucknell University, Calvin Dickey Jr. had that, their athletics program knew, but they didn't follow protocols. Okay. And he passed away.
Yeah, thank you. My time has expired. I yield back. The chair next recognizes the ranking member for a closing statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and all of us for being here. I really want to thank the witnesses again. One just observation of the last conversation is one of the threats to minor league sports is these subsidies that come from those big sports. There are some instances where there's more pressure to get rid of minor sports so that that money stays in those two big programs. So we want to keep those minor sports going. We have to have an honest conversation about all of this. And I'm encouraged by some of the conversation today that there's an acknowledgement to keep your experiences, my experiences, healthy by making sure that this revenue continues to be generated in such a way that it continues to support this larger, really beneficial culture in college sports for all the college athletes. As I said earlier, our priority in this committee must always be the health and well-being of the college athletes. That benefits everyone, but particularly they should be the focus of our attention. It is our responsibility to stand with these students as they stand for themselves. College sports have changed since the days of amateurism and leather helmets, as many athletes suffer exploitation and abuse. It should come as no shock that many are attempting to exercise their right to defend themselves and organize for their own protection. College athletes are not a monolith, as we've talked about today, and should not be treated as such. It would be inappropriate to ban all athletes from being classified as employees, just as it would be inappropriate to call every single college athlete an employee. College athletics exists on a spectrum, and employment issues should be addressed according to existing labor laws. As we speak, the current administration is attacking higher education, and that also creates a vulnerability for the college student. So while I'm grateful for the productive discussion on college athletics, and I see a potential for us on this committee and on the other committees of jurisdiction to come up with a meaningful solution, Mr. Chairman, let us not forget that one of the biggest problems and threats facing public education today is not college athletes unionizing. It is the policies and priorities of the current administration. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the ranking member, and now I'd like to make my closing statement. First, if there's any polling available from NCAA from student athletes on their interest in joining or not joining a union, I would like to, for the committee to do the research on that, and let's get that polling so we can kind of, hear from the athletes themselves on what they're thinking about this. And then certainly from your comment about the Department of Education, we're spending more money than any other nation, and we're losing ground rapidly in education. So we got a lot of work to do on this committee, and I agree with you, ranking member, that we've got to correct that that process. But we've learned a lot today, and in-house about the student athletes and how they'd be negatively affected if they were classified as employees. Obviously, we don't want our athletes in danger, and we need to speak to that as well. Employee status would harm these athletes by restricting their freedoms, altering their significant benefits they currently enjoy, undermining non-revenue generating sports, triggering unintended consequences like taxing scholarships, and taking the focus off education, which I said earlier should be our #1 priority, which is central and really the whole reason for the student-athlete experience. I mean, it was college first, then athletics, I believe, is the way it all got started. In response, our committee colleague from Michigan, Representative Lisa McClain, introduced the Protecting Students Athletes Economic Freedom Act, which would shield student athletes from misguided efforts to deem them to be employees. It is my hope that my committee colleagues will join this effort and continue to work together with our colleagues on other committees to find solutions that ensure the viability of college sports for future generations. I would like to thank our witnesses again for taking the time to testify before the subcommittee today. And without objection, there being no further business, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.